All right, guys, it is time for the Spotlight on Jim Shooter. Yeah, all right, there we go. We'll get casual here. You guys don't mind that, right? Perfect. So basically, we're just going to do some fun Q&A. See if we can get to know this guy here. I think he might have a few things he'll want to talk to us about.
Funny stories.
He does have some good stories. I've been slowly getting some of them out of him here, so he's got some good ones. So why don't we just jump right into it? Do we have anybody who's got a question out there? Anybody? All right, blue hat right there.
Can you just elaborate on the Secret Wars storyline?
Secret Wars.
Secret Wars storyline. Well, what happened was that Kenner Toys, Hasbro was doing so well with G.I. Joe and Transporters and all that. Kenner Toys decided they wanted to try superheroes, so they went to DC Comics and got a license to do superheroes. Mattel, of course, everybody spies on each other all the time, so Mattel knew about that, and then they thought maybe they should have some superheroes just as a hedge against Kenner. So they came to Marvel, and then Marvel, the publishing guys, we were pretty cool. The upstairs people, the licensing, accounting, executive types, none of them had ever actually opened a comic book, okay, including the president of the company. They had no idea, and they couldn't care less. That's why I got to go on all these trips to book fairs and stuff, because I was the only one who could intelligently tell the licensees what the X-Men were doing, or who the X-Men were, for that matter. And before I go on with the story, to illustrate that point, the international licensing person, when we were in New York one day, she calls me up. They wouldn't come downstairs to my office because it's the jungle down there, strange creatures. But the upstairs executives occasionally call me. So her name is Gail, and she calls me and she says, "Jim, I just made the greatest deal for Wonder Woman." I said, "Gail, we don't own Wonder Woman." She said, "What do you mean we don't own Wonder Woman? I just made a great deal." I said, "Well, call the lady at DC and tell her you teed up a deal for her. Make that sound like you did a favor for her, you know?" I said, "We don't own Wonder Woman." She couldn't believe it. She was shocked and amazed. I said, "Gail, why don't you actually open some books and find out who the characters are that you're trying to license?" Anyway, all right, it's the same situation. Mattel comes to see the Marvel people, and of course they meet with our licensing people and a couple of the other big shots. And so Mattel's saying, well, who you got? And they're looking at their lists. Ghost Rider, Daredevil, and they'd never heard of those. So of course I'm summoned to the meeting, and I said, no, we have all kinds of great characters. And of course you've heard of Spider-Man and the Hulk from the TV show, and I started telling him about how wonderful the Fantastic Four was and the X-Men and how popular they were. And while Kenner had licensed, let's face it, Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman, Robin, everyone in the world had heard of them. High Q scores, they call it. We didn't have as good a Q scores on Daredevil and Ghost Rider. I said, however, in our business, our comics outsell theirs 5-1. Okay, and I said, so you have a very solid, market here. And they said, yeah, but they don't, we need more national publicity. Can you get us national publicity? And I said, like how? And they said, well, could you do some publishing event that would get a lot of attention? I said, okay, let's have all the major heroes, all the major villains in one big 12-issue story together. If we do it right, people will like it, and we can maybe get some publicity. And they said, that'll do, that's good. So that was how we had to do Secret Wars. The story behind the story is that idea was suggested to me 12 times a day in the fan mail. A lot of people would write it. Say, why don't you have one big story and put all the characters in? And I always used to say, because it would be hard, and I'm doing that. And but then I had to do it. So I was lucky. I got great artists, and Mike Zeck, John Day, and we used the black Spider-Man costume, got us an awful lot of publicity. That was a funny thing too. When I decided we were going to use the black costume, see, all of Secret Wars happens between the December books and the January books, but it takes months to tell the story of what happened in between. So all the heroes and villains left in December. They were swept away in December, and they arrived back in January. But some of them are different, like, oh look, Spider-Man has a black costume. So we decided to do that, and I told the PR lady, they're going to change Spider-Man's costume, and I said, maybe just do a press release. Her name was Pam Wright, P-R. All right, coincidence? I don't think so. So anyway, she said, all right, and I quote, "No one will care." All right, okay. So I went ahead and did my thing, and we did this black Spider-Man costume, and the day that Spider-Man 252, I think, for 252, came out, my phone starts ringing off the hook, all the wire services, newspapers across the country, radio stations, TV stations. So I go to the PR lady, I say, you know, people care. And so they had to scramble around to try to cover all that and make it look like they had planned it all along. So the one last end to that story is that the licensing people, those crazy licensing people, both domestic and international, called me up. And they said, are you out of your mind? We have the red and blue costume licensed all over the world, and you changed it? I said, that's going to be fine. I said, yeah, I can have 2 suits of clothes. You know, what's wrong with that? It'll be okay. And they're just screaming at me, so I hung up on them. And then later that day, as word spreads, licensees from all over the world started calling and telling them they wanted the black costume as well as the red costume. So I doubled their business, completely inadvertently, but I doubled their business. And so then they loved me. And actually for 2 years, Marvel used the black costume on the company stationery. Everybody had the cards and the letterhead and all that with the black costume. So have I run that into the ground? I think so.
All right, okay, right back there, hand up.
First of all, I want to say thank you. When I was in high school, I sent some story ideas to Marvel, never expecting to hear anything back, but I got something back with your handwriting on it that gave me feedback, and it said, not this time, but try again. So I want to thank you for that, and reiterate, your story in getting into comic books is probably one of the best I'd ever heard about the age you were when you started and when you started writing for DC. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Well, my family needed the money, and when you're 12 years old, they won't hire you at the factory down the street, So I tried to think, well, what can I do to make some money? I already had a paper route that's like $5 a week or something in those days. And so I loved comics. I said, hey, somebody must get paid for doing this, Maybe I could do that. So I studied comics, not just read them. I studied, tried to figure them out for about a year, and I thought I was ready. And I wrote 3 stories and I sent them into DC. And after the first one, they wrote back and said, you may have a future. Why don't you send us another one? So I sent them 2 more, and then they called me and they said, we want to start using you as a regular writer. And they didn't know I just turned 14 at that point. And I wrote the first 3 when I was 13. And I said, sure, This guy says, all right, I'm going to start giving you assignments. Your first assignment is Supergirl, 12 pages next Friday. And that's how they gave assignments, I guess. And I started working my way through high school, and they found out I was only 14. They said, put your mother on the phone. And so my mother was on board. It was fine. And so I had to take her with me on my first business trip, which is very uncool, having your mother with you on a business trip. But anyway, what you're saying is important to me. Because I got my job that way, when I first came to Marvel, there was this big pile of envelopes in the corner, it was like a pyramid of envelopes, and I said, what's all that? And I was the editor, and the assistants told me, oh, those are submissions. I said, well, what do you do with them? And they said, well, sometimes, Stan's secretary, if she has a day when Stan's out of town or something like that, she'll send them back unopened, or sometimes we just throw them away. I said, you what? No. I said, no. I mean, I was sort of second in command. I had a little bit of authority. And I said, no, I'll take care of those. And they thought, okay, knock yourself out, you're crazy. So every night I would take home 5 or 6 or 10 or 12 of these things, and I didn't have a typewriter, so I just handwrite letters. You know, I mean, if it came in like crayon on a paper bag, I just write a real nice little encouraging brief letter. If it was, you know, guys who were trying but weren't there, I try to give them, you know, as gentle as possible, give them some criticism and not be mean. And then sometimes there'd be some guys who looked like they were, you know, going to happen. And I remember one time I was at a convention and this guy walks up to me and he says, "Remember this?" And I did a 3-page letter talking about how to ink Jerry Ordway. Who's Jerry Ordway? Right. I said, "No, I don't, but you know, glad I said it." But so anyway, then when I became editor-in-chief and I had a lot more authority, I was able to, like, I said, look, submissions were coming in by the tons by that point. And so we had to have high school interns open them up and kind of sort them a little bit. And then once a month, I would have all the assistant editors and even some of the editors gather in the conference room, and because we'd fall behind, you know, and then we'd all just pitch in for one day and try to get it done. But they all got answered. Sometimes you find yourself saying the same thing again and again. So we did have form letters. We had 12 different form letters. And if the form letter didn't quite cover the situation, we'd write something by hand on the bottom. It's probably what I did with yours.
Yours is handwritten and provided some amazing feedback. And for a little kid from, you know, Westfield, New Jersey, that meant an awful lot to me.
Oh,
and I really appreciated that.
Well, thank you very much for saying that. That's great. But anyway, so we did reply to every single submission, and we tried to be as positive as possible. And, you know, but like I say, there some guys are just not ready for prime time yet, you know, and maybe some look like they might be, and whatever. There's one assistant editor one time, he was looking at this and he asked somebody else to look at it, and he's like, "Nah, we don't think it's good enough." And I walked over and said, "That's the latest issue of Micronauts by Michael Golden. Must have gotten in the wrong pile. You know? And you guys are dodos." But anyway, so, all right, yeah, but thanks for that.
Thank you for championing us.
That was fun. I like that one. All right. Oh, right here in front.
Yeah, I want to know if you have any stories to tell about the characters that Marvel had that really made a splash in the Marvel universe, but are now owned by Hasbro, so Transformers, G.I. Joe, but especially Rom and the Micronauts.
Well, I mean, we did that under contract to Hasbro, and part of it is that they owned it, you know. But I guess, well, I know Marvel got paid very well, and so, you know, we're work for the company, we're doing our jobs, you know. I did some of the creative, I did on G.I. Joe and Transformers, and a lot of the other toys that got shoved down my throat. So once something worked, the upstairs executives would say, "Well, let's just do that," you know. No. You know, it's like, well, Star Wars worked, Indiana Jones worked, like, just do movies. And I would say, no, it has to be a super movie. You know, if you do Kingdom of the Spiders, it's no good. And they say, well, we have Spider-Man. I said, doesn't have anything to do with Spider-Man. But they never opened the books, they didn't know. So that's one of the other vice presidents in charge of promotions. She calls me up and says, how many stories are in each comic book? She's like, 3 or 5? I said, Pam, Nancy, it's usually 1. And sometimes it's continued. Maybe you should, like, open the book, have a look, you know? But so that's what I was up against. I mean, we had the greatest crew ever assembled downstairs. And the bozos upstairs. After Perlman bought Marvel, his CEO and I were talking one time. And he said, you know, he said, we've been filtering those people out, getting them out one at a time. He said, we don't want to have like a bloodbath because that would look bad. He said, but if all of them like drowned on the same day in the East River, no one would notice for a month. And I said, yeah, well, that kind of sums up my experience with them too. So, and they did eventually replace all of those people.
All right, there, Superman.
So when you talk about executives and all that stuff, looking forward, the movies and all that stuff, where do you see the comic, the actual reading of the books? Where do you see that going looking forward?
Where do I see the comics going forward in this age, where all the movies are happening and stuff? I see them going to hell in a handcart. I mean, these guys have forgotten what business they're in. You know, it's supposed to, it's entertainment first. You do entertainment. I mean, if a character has an opinion or a political point of view or a social justice point of view, that's fine. Good, let the character say it. But when the company starts talking at you, or the writer starts talking at you, it becomes propaganda. And that's not good. And as if that's not bad enough, that's mostly Marvel. Well, no, it's DC too. It's DC. But anyway, if that's not, P.S. Even if you agree with every word they say, if it's heavy-handed stuff, it's propaganda. Nobody wants to read it, even if you agree with it. You know, and you know, a lot of it's fine. But the other thing they forgot is that this is a serial medium, but you will have to make each issue important enough so that somebody wants to buy it. All right, they got this Brian something or other, Bendis, hey, what's the word? That guy. I mean, I think he was the one who started this, what they call decompressed storytelling. And so he takes 12 issues to do an origin for Miles Morales, the new Spider-Man, and stand it in 11 pages, and it was better. You know, I don't even think about it. Like, you know, all right, somebody says you should read this. All right, I'll read it. So I read it, and Spider-Man's on the cover of the first issue, and by the end of that issue, no Spider-Man has appeared in costume inside, and this young man has, the sum total of that issue is got bitten by a spider, and he discovers he can turn invisible. What? I don't know. Second issue, Spider-Man's on the cover in costume. Nowhere in that issue is he in costume. By the end of the second issue, he discovers by accident he can stick to walls. I'm thinking, this is going to take a while. And in fact, somebody told me, I didn't buy them all, somebody told me it was 12 issues. That means your investment, $4 a pop, is $48, you know? I get the senior citizen discount at the movies. I'd rather go to 5 movies myself, you know, but I mean, and I think a lot of people would. It's this glacial storytelling, you know, it's not good. I mean, there were some people before my time who had some kind of weird ideas, like I had writers saying to me, oh, I'm doing this one as a rest issue. You don't do, what, rest issue? What do you mean? Oh, we don't want anyone to die from the excitement, huh? You know, God, you know, give me a break. Or this is the setup issue. You know, did Stan ever do a setup issue? Did Stan and Jack ever do a setup issue where like nothing happens but you're teeing it up for the next issue? No. It's entertainment. You gotta know your craft and earn your living. You know, if you don't entertain people, then you're not doing your job. So, anyway.
All right, let's start on this side and then we'll go over there.
So sort of springboarding off that question, you know, Marvel was sort of known for doing, you know, comics very differently from like DC, right?
Yes.
Like real life, real world stuff. So what's the Marvel now to you? Like, well, where do you see that kind of sort of edginess, the entertainment factor that you're talking about? That's, you know, not packaged into all these extra.
Do you mean like who's doing stuff like that now?
Where do you see that? Who's doing it? Is it in independent comics? You know?
Yeah, I actually got to know Eric Stevenson, and he keeps sending me free comics. He's the guy that runs Image Comics, and some of the stuff I could do with that. But every once in a while they come up with something that's great. There's this thing called Saga. It's really good. It's really good. And this lady Fiona Staples, and she draws like paints like crazy, everything. And the writer does a good job. And you know, they're writing an epic. This is not. I mean, but each issue usually has a fairly solid story in it, but it adds up to a bigger and bigger thing. And so I'm liking that. And there's a few others. I'm trying to think of the title one right now, but I can't. So anyway, yeah. And there's every once in a while there's some indie that comes along that seems good. There's a guy named Ted Sikora, who if I had him at Marvel back in the day, he could have been trained so easily, and he can be trained so easily. He knows a lot right now, but man, I keep thinking if I had time to talk to this guy, I could give him a few tips, and it really would help him. He publishes something called "Are you ready for this? Tap Dance Killer?" and some other stuff. But the Tap Dance Killer is really good. He asked me I told him it was good. He asked me to write a review for him. And my review was, a tap dance killer is like finding water in the desert. No, there's some good guys out there, but right now the big two have really let everybody down because they were the ones that sustained the comic shops. And if they're not doing that, if their books aren't selling, and the comic shops are dying, there's a lot fewer comic shops now than there were a few years ago. And also, you look at the sales. I know guys at Diamond, and I know some people who knows things. Steve Jeppy, for instance. And he tells me the sales of some of these books are like 8,000, 10,000. Like 15,000 is like a big deal. Every once in a long time, not every once in a while, they'll do a Batman #1 or an X-Men #1 on a limited series, and that'll sell a little higher. But the sales are pretty pathetic. And in my day, our average book, average issue, would sell 300,000 copies. That's average. And at Marvel, if it got under 200,000, we started thinking like, maybe we can do something better. Maybe we can help this or fix it, which we did with Thor. We got Walt Simonson, and boy did he fix it. And then sometimes Ghost Rider seemed to have run its course for a while, so we stopped that, and then we did West Coast Avengers or something instead. And so forth. But now I think that it's like the publishing is really bad, and you almost have to rebuild the whole distribution system. So it would take either a lot of money or something like a groundswell. I would have to take something, just taking off and being in such demand that it was Harry Potter, in its effect. Okay.
All right back to the gentleman in blue.
So I'm a big fan of your Avengers work. Who was your favorite artist to do your scripts?
Favorite artist on the Avengers? Bob Hall's pretty good. Bob Hall. My favorite, I'd have to say, was George Perez. Sorry, Bob. But no, George did just amazing stuff. He was one of those guys, I'd give him the plot, and he'd give me everything I asked for, and then he'd throw in stuff that I wasn't expecting. That's what Kirby used to do with Stan. Like, Stan does a Galactus story, and Kirby throws in this Silver Surfer character. And, George would do that too. He would just put stuff in that was everything I asked for, but better, or everything I asked for, but more. And that was really kind of cool. I couldn't wait to see the pencils, to see what curveballs he threw me. I'll tell you one story. I had this story where we created this character, Jocasta. George designed her. I wrote the story. I created the character, wrote the story. And she was like on the run from the Avengers and hiding out someplace. They're trying to find her because Ultron's involved and there's shady things are going on. So I had them. I don't know what location I gave George for her to be hiding, but George, he asked me, he said, can I put her in the cloisters? Because I want to draw the cloisters. You know what the cloisters are? It's way uptown in Manhattan. It's a, what do you call it? Convent. And, and it's a tourist attraction. Go up there, and it was moved here, like, I think brick by brick from France or something. But it's really architecturally interesting. George just loved doing complicated stuff. So he said, we're going to have her hiding out at the cloisters. I said, all right, fine. So he draws this scene. I had the Avengers find a way to track her to the cloisters. And so what he does is he draws this scene where the Avengers are knocking on the door at the cloisters. And the Mother Superior answers the door. And he had the Beast talking to her, asking her, hey, have you seen any giant robots lately? And and he puts a note in the margin. Wouldn't it be fun if the Beast talked to her in Latin? All right, Perez, you asked for it now. So I actually went and found a Berlitz translator, and it was hard. It was in Pittsburgh. I had to go to my hometown and got somebody who could translate into Latin. And I wrote it in English, And I tried to write it so that the Latin, it's not like I'm totally unfamiliar with Latin, but try to make it so that even if you couldn't read the Latin, you could get it, you'd understand, where what is it, fugitivum or something, is. So I put that in the script in Latin, and and the Mother Superior replies in Latin. And when George saw that, he almost fell off his chair. I said, "Gotcha."
All right. Do you have any more questions out there? All the way in the back.
Good to see you again. You were down in Fort Myers not too long ago. I think it was like last year, 2 years ago.
Yeah.
We briefly talked about it. I don't know how much you can or cannot say. Do you see the next phase of the MCU going towards Secret Wars?
My phase of the MCU, what do you
So
mean?
in the Marvel movie verse that's kind of going on,
Oh,
going
yeah.
to the next phase, like especially with the scrolls. Do you
Yeah.
see it as a Secret War?
Well, I'll tell you what I know, which is this one clown called me from Marvel, and he wasn't an editor or anything. He was some executive in the property management area, which was a little odd. And he asked me if I wanted to write a novelization of Secret Wars. And I said, well, I'd consider it, And so he sends me an offer, and the offer came with a contract. And the contract was like this thick. And almost all of it was a retroactive work for hire. And it was belt and suspenders. It covered every possible conceivable way. And if the court doesn't support that, then your children have to go to jail. And it's just terrible. And it's just draconian, giant work for hire thing. And then 2 pages of what the deal was, and the deal was unacceptable anyway. It was like, no, I'm not doing this. It wasn't, it wasn't even a real offer. I guess maybe he thought I was desperate or something, but so I turned him down, and then I get a call from his boss. His boss is named David Bogart, and he's some executive vice president of something or other to do with the properties. And he apologized for this lower down guy who was trying to con me into signing a work for hire. And I said, why? I said, he said, well, I can't really talk about it, but we would like you to sign a work for hire. I said, fine, send it to me. I did a work for hire. It's yours. Just send me the papers. I'll sign it. And he said, no. He said, look, we're prepared to pay you $10,000 to sign your name. And I said, you don't have to pay me anything. I know it was work for hire. What do we do? Lie about it? Yeah, I was editor-in-chief. I didn't know it was work for hire. But they didn't have a single piece of paper that said that they owned the Beyonder, Titania, Volcana, and the other characters that we put in there, the new Spider-Woman for that matter, and the whole black costume thing. Nothing. They had no piece of paper to say they owned it. And I said, you don't have to pay me, send me the damn paper, I'll sign it. He said, take the money, dummy. I said, all right, I'll take the money. So anyway, I signed the work for hire, and I was talking to him, and I said, this means you're making a movie, right? He said, well, I'm not allowed to tell you that. I said, I think you just did. And he said, well, you have to have a clean chain of title, and that's true. Hollywood is very risk averse these days. It used to be somebody make a movie and immediately someone would sue them saying, I mentioned that idea to someone at your company at a party a million years ago, So they want an absolutely bulletproof chain of title before they develop a movie. So when I signed that, they had an absolutely bulletproof chain of title, and I have a couple of friends out in Hollywood that told me that they've done some development on it. The trouble is it's tricky because with all those characters, some of them are obligated to other companies, and there's contractual problems. So whether that'll ever happen or not, I don't know. But I do know they're trying. I know for a fact they're trying, and I don't care. He never told me, and I want you to know that. I mean, he never told me in so many words, but yeah, that's what they're doing.
Okay, don't tell anybody, that's a secret, okay?
That's a secret, just us.
Just between us.
Eyes only.
All right, do we have any more questions out there? All right, right over there, Lou.
Yes, sir. I was always impressed by your signature and the editorial. It just seemed like it was really bold and out there kind of thing. And I was always had the impression that you were like a no-nonsense guy, you know, how you handle things, but you really cared about the reader and informing us. I always look forward to turning to that editorial page and reading that stuff. Is that how you kind of manage the bullpen and all the work there? Just said, hey, we're here for the reader, so let's make sure we give them good stuff.
What he said, the thing is, the convenient thing that happens, when I came in as editor-in-chief, comics were dying. The direct market hadn't really started yet. It's 1978. In the year 1978, Warren went out of business, Charlton went out of business, Harvey stopped publishing, Archie went all reprint, and on one day in June, DC Comics canceled 40% of their titles. Marvel was like the healthiest patient in the terminal ward, you know, they're just barely hanging on. The good news was that when all those companies were dying or pulling back or whatever, a lot of talent became available, and boy, I needed help. I mean, I took that job and everything was late. A lot of stuff wasn't very good. There was embezzling, double vouchering, outright stealing, and a whole bunch of unprofessional behavior going on. And you know, it was chaos, and I'm trying to solve it. You know, and then all of a sudden, people like Louise Simonson is available because Warren died. You know, we got Archie Goodwin back, Larry Hama and Al Milgrom, because DC cut back, were available. Danny O'Neill was available, not because of that, but he became available. He wanted to be a writer at DC, and they wouldn't give him a contract, and didn't really have any work for him. And so he came to me, and I said, Danny O'Neill, you can teach people. Sure. And so all of a sudden I have this great crew. It wasn't all of a sudden, but I quickly had this great crew, and other guys like Bob Budiansky, Carl Potts eventually, Jim Salicrup was great. I had Roger Stern for a while. Bob Hall was one of the first editors I hired, and he eventually, he was also a playwright, and he had to go to London to manage some production of his. So he had to bail out, but he came back and then he was an artist for me. And anyway, the thing is, once I got the good guys, you know, I got my own good production manager, and I had the fiercest traffic manager in the world, Virginia Romita, John Romita Sr.'s wife. She's about this big, everybody was afraid of her. So anyway, we got, you know, it was easier then, because we were all on the same page. We all felt the same way. You know, some of these guys that worked at DC or other places, they weren't allowed to do what they knew was the right thing to do. And I said, that's what we want to do. And they all wanted to do it. We were all, you know, so now it's all of us preaching this stuff. And all of us worrying about the fans and trying to do our jobs for a change. I think a lot of people, even while I was there, but especially before, they were in the business of entertaining themselves, you know, and just cashing the paychecks. And I said, no, if we don't turn this around, it's dead. And so we turned it around. And of course, DC is not going to let that stand. They say, well, they're going to try to fight back. So they're doing Watchmen, and they started doing good stuff, you know, Dark Knight. And the whole industry started to rise. And as there were more and more, the direct market started to grow. The fact that we were doing better stuff helped the direct market stores grow. The more the direct market stores, the more we sold. And so everybody, the rising tide was lifting all the boats. And then because of that, now there was suddenly a venue for all small publishers to get involved. Because you see, the newsstand distribution is totally corrupt. You know, it's a long story, but it's a bad thing. But the direct market, firm sale, okay. So if you want to publish your little black and white book and sell it for $2 or whatever, $3, and you sell 10,000 copies, because there are 10,000 comic stores, and each one's going to buy at least one, you know. And so a lot of these guys started to prosper. ElfQuest, Cerebus, Distant Soil, you can name more than I can. But all these little publishers started to take off, and then some medium-sized publishers started out, and we tried to help them. Pacific Comics was already a distributor. The Shannis brothers showed up in my office and they said, we want to start publishing. I said, okay, let me show you how. And spent a couple days with them. Rick Obadiah showed up in my office originally to license us Warp, which he owned the rights to. And he became interested in the direct market and everything, and I explained it to him. And I actually sat down with him for 3 days and told him, this is how you publish. And so he went off and started First Comics, and Eclipse Comics started up, and they were doing great. So it was, you know, and people used to ask me, why are you helping these guys get started? I said, because we're trying to save this dying business, you know. The more, you know, people doing interesting stuff, the more we segment the market, the more they're, you know, the more the merrier. And besides, they're almost our farm club. Guys start out there and then they want to work for us, you know. And I also said, if we can't, if on a level playing field we can't win against any of these guys, we don't deserve it. Well, if you can't win with Archie Goodwin, Louise Simons, Larry Hama, et cetera, fire the coach. Because, you know, that's a hell of a team. So and the whole market was just soaring. And the thing is, it really kind of peeved DC because when we both, with 1978, we were each about 30% of the market, Marvel and DC. After a couple of years, Marvel was 70% of the market, and DC had fallen to 18, okay, and some of the other publishers were gone. But here's the thing. Because the rising tide lifted all the boats, because the market grew so much, 18% was bigger than 30% used to be. And so they were doing great. They just were a little peeved about losing the market share. Paul Lipps did an interview once where they asked him about that, and he said, Jim Shooter plays hardball. So one of my guys, Jim Owsley, who's now Christopher Priest, he went out and had a bronze plaque made and glued it on my door in the middle of the night, you know, and it's Jim Shooter plays hardball. I liked it, I left it there.
Thank you for your contribution.
All right, anybody else out there with a question? Okay, we'll go all the way in the back first, then we'll come forward.
If it was as easy as just make good stuff, everybody would be doing it. What's stopping others from doing that?
He said, if all the secret's just making good stuff, why doesn't everybody do that? What's stopping them? The fact is, they can't, okay? I mean, a lot of people think they can just sit down and write because they can write an English sentence, and there's a lot more to it than that. It's like thinking you could be a dentist because you have teeth. No, when we were 70% of the market, First Comics, and I helped them get started, First Comics sued us for antitrust. Because one of the tests of antitrust is you're over 70% of the market. And so our defense was what is called superior acumen. We know how, you know, and they alleged all kinds of stuff, that we were fixing prices and this and that. And when in Discovery it comes out that they were paying less to print their books than we were. They had a better deal with the printer than we did. And that was thrown out of court several times. And finally they asked us if we just paid their lawyers, they'd go away. So we paid their lawyers. It's $30,000, you know. It would have been, driving them into the sea might have had some satisfaction to it, but you know, let's just get rid of it, you know. At any rate, no, it's really not as easy as you think. Just do good stuff. I mean, you have to get good people, and they have to be interested in entertaining everyone, not just themselves. And you have to, you know, really be able to work with creators and help them express their vision. Don't restrain them. On the other hand, you've got to get them kind of pointed in the right direction. That's where the expression herding cats comes from, trying to get all these people going vaguely the right direction. Well, I had the best people in the world. And, you know, guys like Archie Goodwin, Larry Hama, they knew their stuff. I had this guy to work for me named Andy Yankus, colorist. And he was in the office. And he was like big friends with Len and Marv and a couple other people who worked at DC. And one of my guys came to me one time and he said, you know, Andy Yankus calls them and tells them everything that's going on here. I said, tell him to invite them over and they can hear every word we say and they still can't do it. So, you know, Not that DC didn't have some talented people, obviously. They had some great people. They got Miller for a while, and they managed to piss him off, and he left. Came back to us. They had George Perez. They had, Jose Luis Garcia Lopez. There were talent. There was talent there. But the corporate culture, believe me, I know from the '60s when I worked there, and the '70s when I worked there. They thought that they didn't think they were in the business I thought we were in. They thought they were selling comics to 8-year-olds. Seriously, that was the corporate culture there. Give you one example about DC Comics. At DC Comics, when I started in '66 and far before that, I actually started in '65, but the first time in the office was '66. And I was told, you have to have a jacket and a tie, or they won't let you into the office. And that was true. You ever see a picture of Neil Adams with a tie? He was at DC. But at any rate, and that policy remained in effect till 1977. All right? I remember Marty Pasco and Kerry Bates were the first guys to try to get into DC without a tie. They had jackets and open collars, and they let them in. And I'll tell you, it's the buzz of the industry. Phones are ringing all over town. David, Bates and Pasco got in. Holy cow. So, that's a very kind of stodgy attitude. They thought they were in the insurance business or something. But there were great people there, and people cared in spite of all that. And they did some good stuff. But I think that a lot of them just, didn't have their eye on the ball. And they wanted to use gimmicks. They thought gimmicks were the answer to everything, When Marvel was eating their lunch in the '60s, I was at some of these meetings, so I know. They started doing things like, well, what is it about Marvel? Maybe it's the garish coloring they use. So they started doing things like running color in the panel gutters to make the books look more garish. Well, that didn't work. And then they said that when Strangle came along, he started doing those crazy panels and stuff. They said, well, maybe that's it, No. They tried to make Kurt Swan do slanty panels, and, that didn't work. I could have told them, but they wouldn't listen anyway.
All right, last one, there in blue.
All right, so what was your favorite type of book to write? What is it, like the cosmic stuff or more the street level stuff?
What was my favorite type of book to write? The way I approach it, and I think the way most the writers approach it is like total immersion. Whatever I'm writing, I work on it, I research it, I try to figure out all the possibilities. And if I'm writing Iron Man, there's nothing better in the world than Iron Man. That's all I can think of is Iron Man. Iron Man is the greatest thing that ever happened, And then the next month I'm writing Captain America, and Captain America is the greatest thing that ever happened. So I get real invested, and I think I always use this anecdote. I say, at Marvel Comics, I'd be walking down the hall, and there's two full-grown people arguing at the top of their lungs, who's stronger, Colossus or Spider-Man? And your first instinct is, oh, grow up. And then your second thought is, no, don't grow up, care that much, right? So I think that, I can't say, oh, I did equal effort on everything. I tried my best, which didn't always come out to be my best, but I tried. And I'd say it didn't matter to me if it was a cosmic epic or it was personal. And that's something I learned from Stan. Stan had me all worried when Galactus was attacking the Earth, right? He also, over in Spider-Man, had me worried that Aunt May was sick. That's when you know a guy's a good writer, man. If he got you worried about Aunt May, well, then as much as you're worried about Galactus, that's pretty good.
All right, let's hear it for